All right, seems that folks are trickling in, and I'll go ahead and get started as that's happening. So welcome to part 4 of the Becoming a Resilient Scientist series. And today we focus on developing feedback resilience. In Bethesda, we definitely have moved from late summer to fall, transitioning to winter. There's been some cold mornings. Wherever you are, I hope that there are lots of sunshiny, positive days, and that things are going really well. I have a couple of comments that I want to make as we reach Unit 4, which is more than halfway through the series. So the first thing that I want to address is the issue of folks starting out in coming to the groups and then letting go of it. And I know there are lots of reasons for that. I know that all of you are very, very busy, but I want to one more time reiterate that I think the groups are one of the most important parts. We build resilience and we find new ways forward when we put our thoughts and our feelings into words, when we listen to others, when we are validated by others. And so we are going to incentivize all of you to join groups by holding a raffle after each set of groups for everyone who attended. And then I will be sharing with you one of our career development or personal development books. It's a sign of how important I think it is. Now, I appreciate that I could sort of get skunked and somebody could show up, and sort of do something else in the background, but I trust that if you come, you will really engage. I think that it is a really important thing. The second thing that I wanted to do was invite those of you at NIH and those of you who are not at NIH, so this is an invitation to all of you to join what we call resilience skills groups. So the way we see this material is that we give you an overview. We go a little bit deeper into some areas than others, but in general, we give you an overview. And then each of you realizes where you have more learning. You realize where you want more learning. You realize the areas where you have real strengths and the areas where you want to develop further. And we, as a result of that, have developed these opportunities to go a little bit deeper. So we have 3 groups coming up: a stress resilience skills group, an ADHD management group, and an anxiety management skills group. They start in either November or December. All of the information and the time of each of the groups can be found in that link to the Sign Up Genius. You can also just email oitewellness@nih.gov. We have capacity. We have always limited these groups to NIH trainees, but we reflected on that and decided to do one round sort of experiment of having joint groups that are university-based and NIH intramural-based. So if you're interested in any of these, please click on that link. It'll come in the slides when you get the slides later today. So we're going to talk about feedback today, which is essentially the information that you receive about your current behavior. The idea in giving feedback should be learning. So we want to let someone know if they're on the right track, if they need to modify behavior. Feedback can be spoken, it can be words, it can be unspoken. A simple rolling of eyes can be received, as important feedback, right? I can't believe you would say that. You could come up to somebody and they could put their hand forward. Out. So feedback can be unspoken as well. Feedback can be very formal. It can be informal. And I think that's really important to remember. So people give you feedback. to let you know what is going well, what you should continue, what you should change, what you should modify, what you're doing that needs to be reevaluated. In general, we can talk about feedback as appreciation feedback. That's when somebody says, this is going well. The idea there is keep doing it this way. Coaching feedback, there's a better way to do this, or let me teach you a way to do this. Consider doing it this way. And evaluation feedback, here's where you stand. Let's go over in a formal way, somewhat formal way, what you've accomplished, what you have left to accomplish, what went well, what didn't go well. There's a lot of overlap between these kinds of feedback. And a lot of times people, rather than paying attention to it this way, will just say, I've received positive feedback or negative feedback. Some people like to use the word developmental feedback. I like to use it because I think the minute we say negative feedback, it elicits in ourselves this protective mechanism. There's an amazing book, Thanks for the Feedback, by Doug Stone and Sheila Heen. I'd like to encourage you to take a look at the book. Some of what I will say today comes out of their material, and it hopefully will be referenced at the bottom of the slides. You know, the honest truth is we need feedback to know where we stand, what we're doing well, what we're not doing well. We also need feedback to know what others prefer, want, or need that differs from what we're proposing. We need feedback so that we can improve and make change. So essentially, we need feedback to successfully navigate the workspace, to successfully navigate interpersonal relationships, to successfully navigate all of the important things that we are doing. It's like I think a key tenet of learning is to receive feedback. But the honest truth is that it is incredibly hard to receive feedback. The honest truth is it's also hard to give feedback, but we'll focus on why is it so hard to receive feedback. So let's start from the first fundamental principle that we are human. We want to be liked. We want to be appreciated, and it is natural to feel defensive when we are critiqued. It's just a part of human nature to have a quick defensive response. A lot of feedback is delivered poorly. That's another reason why it's very hard. A lot of us don't get a lot of training in how to give feedback. A lot of us have not had the best role models. And so that really gets in the way. Very, very often people give feedback with too much sarcasm, frustration, and anger in the moment when, as people's energy ramps up and their stress level ramps up, they might repeat things too many times. And so the combination of all of the energy, the frustration, the repetition makes us really even more defensive. The stress response they have or energy they have in delivering the feedback, we pick up on, we have a stress response, and everything just escalates. Very, very often feedback is delivered with inaccuracies, using words like always and never, or based on third-hand information, second-hand information, and it may not be quite accurate. And sometimes it's really indirect or unclear, and we're not exactly sure what was meant by the feedback. So it can be hard just at first principle of this is difficult, plus it's delivered in ways that make it more difficult. On top of that, it can be really hard to hear critical feedback about something we really care about a lot. And the language I like to use around that is a part of our highly valued self. And I'll give you an example just from me. I get feedback sometimes when I sing happy birthday in a group that my voice could use some work, that I'm pretty tone deaf, and that I should probably be lip syncing. That's not a really highly valued part of myself, and I chuckle and laugh, and I usually sing a lot louder, right in their ear, as off key as I was before. But if somebody gives me feedback about my teaching or about cooking, two things that are a part of my highly valued self, it's a lot harder to hear. So it's funny around both of those, teaching and cooking, because those are things I do want to get better at. So in many ways, I should be incredibly open to thank you for giving me input. I really want to learn from it. But because it's a part of something I hold dear to myself, I feel really even more defensive at times. So that's another reason why it's so hard to receive feedback. Now, for all of you working hard to make progress in your career and in your research and in your applications to schools and jobs, in your efforts to be a part of the healthcare and research teams, right? This is something important to you. So when you get feedback, right, it pokes on that part of yourself that you really value. So the 3 reasons why it's so hard. Because of this, we really need the tools we've talked about in the last workshops. We need well-being tools, we need resilience tools, we need some self-advocacy and assertiveness tools. That way, we can seek out, hear, and respond to feedback we receive. In addition, it allows us the tools to give important feedback to others. So just as much as we need feedback to thrive, we need to be able to give feedback to thrive. And both of those are very, very challenging. So what do we need to become what I like to call feedback resilient? By feedback resilient, I mean we can calm ourselves down so that we can hear feedback, so that we can give feedback, so that we can learn from the feedback we hear, so that we can help others learn about our where we're at, right? So feedback resilient means as uncomfortable as it is, we have the ability to stay calm and focused and hear the feedback. So first, we need to have some self-awareness. So much of what we've talked about really does start with self-awareness. We all have our typical stress response. We all have our typical feedback response, right? Some of us start right away with asking questions. Some of us start right away with saying, okay, whatever, even if we don't mean that, and then we shut down. We all have a way of first responding to feedback. We also have a way of navigating that first response. Some of us have really helpful behaviors of slowing down an initial unhelpful response. Some of us don't. Some of us appreciate our first response is helpful, right? And we want to do it more often. So we need self-awareness about our typical response. We talked in the last unit about our cultural lens and how we navigate hierarchical structures. Do we feel comfortable being assertive around hierarchy? Do we tend to always respect hierarchy in a way that doesn't allow us to speak up? So that's another thing. The third is our go-to cognitive distortions, right? We talked about that in Unit 2. When we're hearing feedback, do we amplify only the positive and ignore anything that's more developmental because of our all or nothing thinking? Do we go from, let me learn from this, to, oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired tomorrow because of our catastrophizing? Do imposter fears make us really concerned about the feedback because we're already unsure of our belonging? And so the minute we hear feedback, we say, aha, see, they're telling me I don't belong. So our cognitive distortions are a big part of understanding our feedback response. 2 other things that we're going to dive into today. One is the communication style we use, the communication style of the other party, and how they go together or don't go together. The other one that we'll dive into today are feedback triggers, or things that come up for us in the moment as we're receiving feedback. Finally, all of this really goes together with our ability to be aware of our emotions, accurately interpret them, and then find the ability to regulate in the moment. especially around discomfort, frustration, embarrassment, and anger, all of which we have talked about in the past, and which I hope we will continue to talk about through this unit. You know, a lot of times our ability to hear the feedback is hijacked by our emotional response. And again, we work and move in high knowledge environments where we want to be seen as smart, where we want to be seen as competent and capable. Let's be honest, we always want to be seen as competent and capable. Maybe it's easier in some circles to say, oh, I don't have this, can I have help? But within work environments, it can be a big challenge to acknowledge, I'm really struggling, can I have help? And so I think that discomfort tolerance, frustration tolerance, our ability to sit with embarrassment, our ability to navigate conversations that feel angry to us, I think those are a big part of feedback resilience. And the more emotional awareness we have, the more we understand how we respond to those uncomfortable emotions, the better. There are 4 major tools for developing self-awareness, and we've talked about these a lot: journaling, mindfulness, communication and talking and sharing with mentors, peers, family, and friends, including coming to the Becoming a Resilient Scientist series groups, and counseling and therapy when we realize that we would like a private space to work on this with experts. And so this is the general stage that is needed. That's why this comes after units 1, 2, and 3, right? Because much of what we've talked about in the previous units sets the stage for this feedback resilience. So we're going to dive into the parts here we haven't done, and we're going to start with communication style. So we're going to do a poll. Uli's going to help with us. If you had to describe your communication style in one word, what would that be? And Uli's going to launch a poll and give you a chance to share and see each other's communication styles. And if you want to put in more than one word, that's fine. Just do it once and then do it again. Impulsive, careful, direct, scared, long, avoidant, long-winded. I would have to say the same thing. Talkative, measured, all kinds of words coming up here. I'm just going to give a few more minutes for people to go ahead and put in their communication style. So there's some more words coming up here: apologetic, upfront, diplomatic, straightforward, timid, not confident, overthought, roundabout. It's good to own where we see our style. The honest truth is, you look at these words and maybe we think, oh, some of them are better than others, but quite frankly, we've all gotten pretty far based on our communication styles. They work for us a lot of the time. They don't always work for us though, right? And what we really want to develop is the ability to be reflective on how they work and when they don't work, and how we'd like to make small changes. Sometimes I like to use the language of smooth out the rough edges. All right, so we have a lot of people who would use direct. I think if you put passive and careful together, we might come up with a little bit more of an indirect style. Lots of other words, lots of ways to describe our styles. Great, thank you, Uli. Now we're going to do something fun, and we're going to go ahead and think of our PI, a boss, or another important person at school, at work. Think about that person. If you had to describe the communication style of that person, what words would you use? And let's go ahead and watch that grow over time. Accommodating, bold, absent, blunt, direct, indirect, abrasive, passive aggressive, clear cut, sparse, amicable, kind, confusing. right? Remember, we talked about why is it hard to hear feedback, right? Sometimes it's unclear. Sometimes it's delivered in hard ways, right? Some of the words up here, abrasive, demanding, timid, straightforward, long-winded, condescending, lots of words here, right? Also, interestingly, right here is direct. Just like you described your communication style as direct, many of you note that your PI or other person important to you and your work or school is direct. Now, what we can't tell from this is what the matchings are, and that's what we're going to spend some time talking about. So there are some people who are dealing with some hard communication styles. There are people who aren't getting a lot of communication, right? So there are some absent, indirect. And so what we're going to talk about between this unit and the next unit is finding ways to have the best ability to communicate across different styles and with people who have different styles. So let's move on to the next slide. And we're going to take another way of looking at communication styles. So I like that free for all, let's just pick some words. But I also like models that really give us shared language. So I'm going to look at this grid here, which addresses people's communication and work styles from the perspective of how much they focus on the other person versus their own needs. And this comes from a book called People's Styles at Work and Beyond by Bolton and Bolton. So on the y-axis is responsiveness. This is the degree to which you are perceived by others as attending to their needs in the interaction. How much are you showing that you want to hear what they have to say, that you want to know how they are doing? On the x-axis is assertiveness, the degree to which you are perceived by others as attempting to prevail and get your way in the interaction. So how much are you focused on the outcome? Sometimes we use the language of task and relationship. So assertiveness being like the task, getting what you need, relationship being responsiveness, connecting with the other person. Now, here is something really important, perceived by others. So I might think that I am a really warm communicator, but it might land on others as a really intense, difficult communicator, right? And we've already brought up issues that gender and race, ethnicity, various stereotypes and expectations play into this. People look at us and they, see us through lenses influenced by culture, right? So sometimes we're perceived by others in ways that are influenced by that. There's also an element that we are not always the best judge of ourselves, right? We sometimes see ourselves through a much harsher lens than we should. We sometimes see ourselves through a much kinder lens than we should. So it isn't just what we think, it's how others experience us. And there's no way to fully tease that out. It's really an issue of looking at interactions and sort of assessing, well, how did that go? What do I think landed well, went well, what didn't? How did I receive things? What landed well, what didn't? I think that's what's so frustrating about all of this is there's so much in the moment, depending on the two people, depending on the situation, and so many challenges in coding and decoding language and communication, especially there's so much unspoken, nonverbal feedback. There's so many things that play into this. And so let's now look at the 4 styles. Now I'm going to use in here 2 different sets of language for each of them. That's because you'll see both of these used in the literature. So we're going to start down here, high on assertiveness or high on task, but low on relationship or responsiveness is someone who uses a driver or directive style. They get right to the point. They lack outward warmth. They tend to interrupt a lot. They're not perceived as good listeners because they are constantly jumping in. They like to control agendas. They come to decisions very quickly. So as you hear these, think about, well, how does that fit me? Think about how does that fit other people that I interact with? Now, if we go up here, we will see also high on assertiveness, but now high on responsiveness, someone who is an expressive or emotive communicator. They talk really fast paced, they use gestures, they take initiative, they control the flow of discussion. They also interrupt a lot and have trouble listening. But at the same time, they want to connect with you. So they are sharing their emotions and feelings. They are asking you a lot of questions. They encourage informality, right? Oh, just call me Sharon. Oh, what happened over the weekend? Let's talk about things in our lives first. So you get this feeling of, oh, they're connecting with me. But they also are focused on the task at hand. So they give this great sense of familiarity, of a really connected relationship. And then at times they are like, no, let's focus on the work right now. So it is a mixture of task and relationship. All right, pause for a moment and just sit with, do I feel like I use one or the other of these very, very often? And maybe the answer is yes, and maybe the answer is no. So let's move over now. We're going to stay high on responsiveness, but low on assertiveness, and you will find amiable or supportive communicators. They easily reach out to individuals. They listen very attentively. They use a lot of warmth to connect. They don't tend to use power. Right? They don't say, well, I'm in charge, so do what I say, because their focus really is on the connection, the relationship, support. And decision-making is sometimes more in the background, or what I should more accurately say is driving decision-making is more in the background. In many cases here, decisions come slower, whereas the driver and expressive might be putting out tons of ideas, tons of suggestions, tons of information. Here, the amiable is holding back, waiting for ideas to come out from others, giving space and time for ideas to develop. And very, very often as decision-making happens, there's a lot of discussion about the people involved. You might not get much of that with a driver or directive. You might eventually get that, but certainly at the beginning, the focus is going to be on let's make the decision. Here are the options. Whereas with the amiable, that's going to come a lot slower. Now, the fourth one here, and then we'll pause for a moment to reflect on this, is the analytical or reflective communicator. Their communication is much more controlled and outwardly unemotional. They like order and time to prepare. They often hold their opinions back. So you go to your PI to get some feedback, and they are listening, but not offering as much information as you had hoped. That could be a part of their analytical or reflective style. They tend, when they give opinions, to make them very measured, right? So instead of saying very clearly, this is what you should do, they're going to say, well, this is one possibility you should consider. And at times, because of the sort of internal analytical reflective style that holds back, they can seem hard to get to know. That doesn't mean that they aren't warm people. It's that you don't see much outward warmth. Whereas here, when you're communicating with someone who uses an amiable style more often, you are seeing more outward warmth. Now, a key thing to appreciate is we all are capable of using all of these, but we tend to have one or two styles we tend to use more often. So what I'd like to do is sit with this for just a moment and let you look at these slides. And just think about where you fit in all of this. Where do you see yourself falling here? Think about people in your lives that you engage with a lot. Where do you see them falling? So that's one key thing. We have a sort of go-to, most likely to use style or two, but we are capable of using all of them as we work on this. The second thing that is really important to appreciate is there is no good, better, or best style. All four of these styles have their strengths. They all have potential liabilities. They all work better in some situations over others. So let's just for a moment think about the potential strengths of each style. Someone who uses the driver or directive style, right? They seem efficient, candid, decisive. You ask a question, it gets answered, right? They can seem really efficient and goal-directed. The emotive or expressive, these are really persuasive people. They use energy to get people to buy in, get people to join their ideas. They can seem very enthusiastic and really fun-loving at times, right? When they are really in this mode of connecting with others with this drive, it can feel really like you're a part of a team. The strength of an amiable or supportive communicator, really caring, warm, diplomatic, calm, easy to talk to, real strengths. Analytical, so logical, so systematic. I can go and really get a sense of what's happening. They can convey this seriousness when they offer their opinion. All of these things are strengths. You would not say that any of these are a greater strength than another, right? It just depends on what is needed in the moment. So those are the potential strengths. But strengths overused can become liabilities. And I like to say this all the time. I actually like to add a little bit more. Strengths overused can become liabilities. Strengths used at the wrong time can become liabilities. So our driver or directive style, which can be really helpful at times, can also come off as abrasive and rash, and that you don't care about others. You can alienate people using a driver or directive style at the wrong time. I imagine that some of you have been on the receiving end of this style and found it really hard to learn in the moment, right? And so that's an example of where this strength used at the wrong time becomes a huge liability. To do good science with your mentors and with your team, you have to be able to grow and learn, ask questions, etc. You're on the receiving end of a driver communicator, and the message you get is, be careful, don't ask questions. The strengths of the expressive, right, which we talked about before as enthusiastic, team building, getting people really excited about things. You could just come off as a poor listener who's impatient, impractical, says things they never honor, throws lots of ideas out, never follows through. They say a lot, but they don't do a lot. Amiable. It can feel so wonderful to be on the receiving end of a calm, warm communication style. But if what you need is really critical feedback and you need somebody to engage with you over an interpersonal conflict, either with them or with others, that style can become a liability. And then, you're really a nice person who never takes a stand, a person who avoids conflict, right, at all costs. Conflict is inevitable. Conflict can drive really positive change, right? So sometimes we have to dive right in and address it. An analytical or reflective individual can seem really standoffish and cold, can seem like someone who's not a team player, someone who takes perfection to an extreme, someone who holds their ideas back and doesn't support the group. So lots of strengths, lots of potential liabilities. And the key thing around that is that we all have our go-to or default style or styles, and that it can be difficult to stretch to use some of the styles. It can be difficult to stretch and be on the receiving end of some of the styles, but that as we develop the most flexibility around these styles, the more we can engage in conversations, get the most out of learning environments. And when it comes to receiving feedback, it's a key part of being able to stick with a feedback conversation. So remember, there are benefits and liabilities to all of the styles. We want to remember that strengths overused become liabilities. So we have a couple of goals: to become aware of our default styles, to appreciate that we work with people who have different styles than we have, that we work to use other styles as appropriate. 3 goals: self-awareness of the styles that are our default. Second goal, that we stretch into using other styles as appropriate. And third, that we learn to adjust to the style of others to improve communication. I think these are 3 really key things. So I would like to take a moment for all of us to think about our styles. And Uli's going to put up a poll where we can put in our default styles. And you can choose as many as you would like. My gut feeling is most of you will have 1 or 2. But some of you might say, oh, I use many more of the styles than 2 on a regular basis. And we're just going to let this go for a little bit. And while you're doing that and voting, I want to make a couple of comments. So I think that at times it's easier for us to think about the styles of others than it is for us to think about our own style. And I think growth in this area really comes from doing both. The second thing is we really get caught in some shame around all of this. And I just want you, whenever you start to feel like, oh, I wish I did this better in communication, I want you to remember that this is a learning process and your growth mindset, that we all can develop skills in these areas. So a lot of amiable or supportive communicators, a lot of analytical, reflective communicators. Down at the bottom is the driver or directive. When we do this with faculty, and we're going to start the Raising a Resilient Scientist series with PIs and other research supervisors in November, we see many more drivers than 10%. So expressives, about a quarter of you. And so go ahead now and let go of what you think your dominant work style is. Let's put that one aside for a moment, and we're going to do one more poll. And that is, which style do you have the hardest time working with? Same thing. Just which one? Same 4 options. If you have a hard time working with 2 of them, go ahead and put both of them. I actually think, as I'm watching this come up, that I'm going to see if I can get somebody to write a blog post on being on the receiving end of a style that's really difficult, because as I sit here and watch the poll, and especially note very few of you see that you have a driver or directive style, you find it most difficult to be on the receiving end of that style. Hierarchy, I think, makes that even harder. I think that this is something we need to develop more. So my hope is we'll talk about it in the groups, and I'm going to try to sort of look at these 2 graphs later and develop some more information. for people to work with. So I want to make a comment there about the bottom, the amiable or supportive. It's not a large number of people who find that hard. It really feels very caring. And everyone wants to feel cared for. And I think at the basis of a really great mentor-mentee relationship is the feeling that our mentor cares about us. And I think it's easiest to feel cared for in that style. But I want to say that sometimes as I work with people, they come to appreciate that that caring needs to come together with the feedback that's needed to grow and learn. That we want the caring and the hard conversation. I also want to stress that drivers or people with directive or driver communication, when used well, can also be good mentors. So I want us to be open to the fact that all of these styles can work, but it's really key to see that half of you say it's very, very hard to be on the receiving end of a driver communication style. I will make sure to show this as I work with PIs some. This is pretty important data, I think, and a nice number of you voted, so it gives some sort of weight to the data. All right, thank you, Uli. So that work, why do this, right? Why think about your style, think about the style of others? Because what we need to do is start thinking about, so what works in our communication and what doesn't work in their communication, and how can I learn to deal with styles that might be a little bit harder for me to deal with. So some journaling prompts for later. What is your dominant style? What about your PI? What about your style works well for you? What doesn't work well? What about your PI and communication? What works well? What doesn't work well? How might you adjust to the style of your PI? What would you ask of them to adjust more to your style, right? So imagine having a conversation with them about this material. What would you say? What would you ask of them? So this is a journaling prompt to give you a little bit of sense of your own style, but then bring into the mix your PI or boss or another person important for you. When it comes to styles and feedback, I want us to look at this set of bullets. So rather than talking in general now, let's think about receiving feedback from someone using a driver style. They will typically get right to the point, be really direct, want to drive the agenda, talk over you, cut you off. They'll end the meeting quickly when they have said what they have to say, and you might want to talk some more, and they're going to say, "We're done. I told you what you need to hear." And that's a bit of an exaggerated caricature, right? And that's part of teaching this material. You have to give people an ease in recognizing this. So it may not be quite as exaggerated as I just presented it, but you get the idea, right? It's a lot of talking at you. You try to say, "Can I explain?" They talk right over you. You want to ask some questions to understand. It might be a little bit hard. Expressives, they get easily off topic. Remember, they want to tell you what they have to say, but they also at the same time want to see where you're at, right? And they might get easily off topic. They will want to talk about it, ask you questions. Do you need to ask me more? Can I ask you more? They might repeat themselves a lot. Every time I do this and I get to that one, I say, ouch, because I tend to repeat myself a lot, even when I'm not stressed. So when I'm stressed, it's even worse, right? So the worst of the expressive style comes out when people are stressed, just like the worst of the driver style comes out when people are stressed. Expressives may want to follow up again and again. You're embarrassed and just want to go away and let it go. And then, can we talk about this? Can we talk about this? Let's go over what was said. That's a bit of how an expressive may give you some feedback. Now, amiables may not take the initiative to give you feedback. So you may be wondering how you're doing, and hoping that somebody's going to step up and give you some feedback. But an amiable may not take the initiative to do that. In addition, they may soften the feedback. Now, at times that's really helpful because it gives you a chance to process slower. But sometimes it's unhelpful because you get the message that it's not so serious, right? So you leave and say, okay, well, I have a few things to work on, but really it's more serious than it was delivered. And as a result, you don't know that. A lot of times amiables will focus on showing they care about you during and afterward. This can help a lot, right? But it only helps if they also give you clear feedback. They also will ask a lot of questions about how you feel. I've noticed that some students really struggle with that. They like it at other times, but during feedback sessions and after feedback sessions, sometimes they need a little bit of time. There is an emotional element to receiving feedback. And when others ask us how we feel, it can really push on our emotions, making it hard for us to feel that we are sort of in control of our emotions at work. Or the feedback can be difficult to hear, and then they show they care, and it feels like a disconnect in the moment. So a lot of these are nice points that might help you. A lot of these can be nice at times and not helpful during feedback. And I think that's true in all of these. Analyticals, again, may not take initiative to give feedback. They often need time to prepare in advance. And sometimes when you go and say, hey, I have a question, can I talk to you? You don't get their best work because they haven't had time to prepare. They also need time to think during the discussion. So there might be quiet times. Now, those quiet times can be really helpful, but if they make you uncomfortable, and most of us get uncomfortable with silence, then it can add to your stress, or you can talk over them and never hear what they have to say. In addition, often an analytical won't provide a lot of detail unless requested. So you have to get really good at asking questions. So rather than getting nervous in those quiet gaps, you want to get good at saying, giving them some time, and then saying, I have some questions whenever you're ready. So the point of this, and the point of sort of giving you the exaggerated caricature, is that as we think about the benefits and the liabilities of someone's style in giving us feedback, it helps us to prepare so we can have some strategies for receiving feedback depending on what style we are dealing with. Okay, so all of you with some reflection will likely get a good sense of the styles of the people that you work with. And then you can reflect on your style, their style, and what you need to do to have the best conversations possible. Now, I want to acknowledge that this whole lecture really is predicated on you wanting to receive feedback well, and your PI or other supervisor or boss wanting to give you feedback well. And some of you may have a feeling that that's not always the case. And we'll talk some about that, quite a bit actually, about that in the webinar next time, where we talk about managing up and getting the most out of mentoring relationships. So people have their style, but if they, and it might be difficult, right? I use both the driver and expressive style. I realize that they work well for me, but I realize they're sometimes very hard on people I work with. I'm not necessarily going to be able to totally change my style, but a well-meaning boss will make an effort to tone things down a little bit, or to do a better job of giving feedback if it's not their go-to style. So all of this being able to adjust styles is predicated on your PI being generally someone that you trust. And I know that's not always the case, but it is often the case. So what I'm asking here is that you sort of accept the communication style of your PI and then think about, so how can I do best with that communication style? Can I imagine helping them understand a little bit about my communication style? So if you're on the receiving end of a driver or an expressive, you want to prepare for the intensity. If a driver overdrives on you, you are really unable to hear anymore, you might suggest talking at another time if necessary. You might want to, as you're interacting with them, make sure that you are somewhat firm back. So that this moves quickly. So short responses. Can I clarify? Understood. I will follow up on that. I'm not sure I agree, right? You want to be you're getting a sort of firm style within respectful boundaries. You need to have a little bit of a more firm response. But I think one of the key things is to prepare for the intensity and suggest talking at other times as needed and practicing your assertiveness skills. Now, an expressive, again, you need to prepare for the intensity. You also need to appreciate that they have this energy focused on some level of connection. I really want to help you. I want you to reach your goals. Meanwhile, you feel like, so much energy is rushing at you. Right? But that's a part of their style, is to try to connect. So I think that it's really important perhaps for you to match that trying to connect. I really appreciate you giving me feedback. I'm having a little trouble hearing you right now. Can I ask some questions? But you are matching their energy in expressing your appreciation and your opinion. Because the relationship matters, it's important to be somewhat kind as you introduce areas where you don't see things the same way. With a driver, you might be able to say, not sure I agree, and it might go over well. But with an expressive, you might want to say, can I just point out a few areas where I see things a bit different? Because they are trying to attend to both task and relationship, and it's best if you do the same. So you are matching your style a little bit. Now, I acknowledge across a hierarchy, that can be a little bit hard. So I'm not saying you match their style exactly. I also acknowledge it can be very, very hard to do. And so even small changes can make a big difference. An amiable, I think it's really important to ask for feedback. It's really important to point out that you value feedback, that you learn from feedback, that you really appreciate them taking the time. You might want to ask clarifying questions to draw them out. You might want to bring those questions with you on paper, or even potentially email to them in advance. They're very focused on connecting with you. You want to be focused on appreciating the feedback, thanking them for taking the time, etc. A really key thing is to wait and give them time to answer your questions. You might need to say, I really appreciate all of that positive feedback. I just wonder if there are some things I need to improve on, right? Because that may be harder to get. And so asking for it helps. An analytical, they need time. So asking for feedback by email and giving them time to prepare makes a big difference. I actually think that can be true in all cases because it allows people to prepare. But here, I think it is critically important. Be comfortable with pauses. Don't jump in right away. Then ask a straightforward question and give them time to respond. I bet that 10-second pause seemed a lot longer, right? To me, I start to get nervous the minute there's silence in a conversation. Analyticals are much more comfortable with silence. I've realized that as I interact with analyticals, if I don't wait, I miss the very best of what they are bringing to the table. And so appreciate that as you are seeking feedback from a PI who has a more analytical skill. Now, many of you said that the driver was your hardest style to be on the receiving end of, and I understand why, right? I look at these bullets and I think that's asking a lot of a trainee. But I do think this idea of preparing for the intensity, knowing in advance that it is likely to be pretty intense, knowing your agenda in advance and trying to come up with some short responses that match their energy can really help. Likewise, there are helpful strategies when you're giving feedback, and you give feedback to each other. And over time, as you develop your mentoring skills, you will be giving feedback to mentees and folks that you teach. And so I just wanted to give you this added slide on helpful strategies around giving feedback. I also like to give you this one because it can really help you in thinking about a conversation with your PI. And we'll talk about that a lot more as we develop this material into the 5th unit. But I think it really helps to give people perspective. If the goal of feedback is learning, we all want to slow down enough to give feedback in a way that can be received. And so rather than going to someone and saying, your style doesn't work for me, you could go to someone and say, I want to get the most out of our meetings. Can we talk a little bit about differences in our styles? We will teach this very same material to PIs. We talk about it a lot from both sides. And I invite you to look at this slide and think about it as you develop your mentoring and management skills. So that's a lot of what I have to say about communication styles and how that feeds into how we receive feedback. Now I want to talk about the other area that we said we need self-awareness around, and that is feedback triggers. And this comes from the work of Stone and Heen and that book I talked about. We have lots of copies of this book, so coming to the groups would be a great way of winning the raffle and getting your hands on one of these books. So first of all, let me define a trigger very, very clearly. A trigger is something that causes a strong and disproportionate emotional response in us. Disproportionate meaning that we respond with a much bigger emotional response because what happened triggers us based on things outside of the actual interaction. So in every feedback interaction, there's you and the other person, there's the communication styles in the moment, and then there are the triggers in the moment. Okay, so we really need to understand feedback triggers. Now, again, we need to understand this from the perspective of receiving feedback, but also from the perspective of giving feedback. So we're all triggered by different things based on our previous experiences, based on things that we carry with us from other environments. One of the key things I find is when trainees were in a difficult mentoring relationship, an absent mentoring relationship where they've really struggled in one group, until they process all of that, put it into perspective, find ways of looking at the situation from a perspective of here's what I've learned, here's what I am taking away with it. Until that happens, we can bring triggers from one environment to another. So I'm going to talk about various types of triggers. You think as I'm talking about this, about things that trigger you. So it can be things from a previous environment, previous experience, all kinds of things. And the first kind of trigger, and so when I say it causes a strong and disproportionate emotional response, it could lead us to shut down, disagree, push back too hard, get more defensive than necessary. Those are truth triggers. The first type, truth triggers. That's where we question the accuracy of the feedback. So sometimes people use the words like always and never, and we say that's just not true. The minute we question the truth of the feedback, we stop listening, right? And usually when people say always or never, that's an exaggeration, and a lot of feedback comes exaggerated. And so that can shut us down. Now, the way to control a truth trigger is first to appreciate it. So in the moment, we want to recognize the triggers. That means really understanding them up front, because to use them in the moment is a real skill set. Sometimes as I'm receiving feedback, when I notice a truth trigger, I pause and I think, well, maybe parts of the feedback are accurate and parts are not. So let me try to separate them. I used to try to separate them in my mind, which never worked for me. But I have this visual hack that I use, which does work. And that is that I have two buckets. So someone is giving me feedback and I think, well, there's some truth to that. The next, someone says something else. I'm like, I'm not so sure that's accurate. Let me put that aside for a moment. Truth triggers usually shut us down from hearing anything else. We also push back very hard at the parts of the feedback that we don't think are accurate. That can escalate a situation in an unhelpful way. And so what we want to do is try to recognize the truth trigger and continue listening even through the truth trigger. At some point, we might want to give some feedback back about what might not be accurate, or that there is some context or an explanation, right? That there is a perspective that the giver of feedback doesn't have. But if we just get triggered by the truth trigger, we're done. Now, when giving feedback, we want to avoid using the words always and never. I think we also want to be careful when talking about things we hear second or third hand. And one other thing that I need to add to the slides, I think that we need to start by saying, I'm not sure exactly what happened here. Can I share what I know now and hear your perspective? So about 2 weeks ago, something happened in the office that really surprised me. Someone told me something about another office and a set of colleagues who I really value and who I thought valued me. And I felt that what I heard really showed they didn't value me. And I wanted to my first inclination was to send a really heated email and just say what I had to say. And I sat with that. Actually, I got up and took a short walk and some deep breaths, used some of the grounding techniques that you've talked about in the groups that are really helpful for slowing things down. And then I decided to just ask for a conversation. And my plan was to go right in and say, I heard this happened and here's how I feel about it. But instead I said, I really value our relationship and I know you feel the same. And I heard something that's really surprising to me. And it turns out that I was given misinformation, and we were able to clear it up in about a minute, maybe even less. And it was such a positive interaction for all of us. But I wanted to give some amazing driver feedback in the moment. So I think avoiding words like always and never, being careful when we hear things second and third hand, and coming into feedback from a curious place of, here's my perception. Can you help me understand where I might be right or wrong? Those are things to keep in mind. On the receiving end, whenever you hear always or never, just assume they're exaggerating and try to say, well, is it true that I often do or rarely do? So that's how we deal a bit with truth triggers. The second type of trigger is a relationship trigger. We question or don't like or trust the person providing the feedback. Okay. A relationship trigger is based on the person giving the feedback. The thing is that sometimes it's not actually the person, it's that receiving feedback from one person of authority was difficult, so we dump that relationship trigger onto the next person of authority. So it isn't actually always the actual person, it can be the position that person has, but it can actually be the person as well. When I feel a relationship trigger popping up for me, when I have some warning signs in my feedback response where I feel tenseness, I start to realize I'm getting defensive. If I note that it's a relationship trigger, I try to say things to myself like, if this was a different person, would I feel different? A lot of times the answer is yes. There are some people that trigger us more than others. There are some reasons for that, having to do with previous relationships. Sometimes people remind us of someone. Sometimes there's not a lot of trust with someone. The hard one here is when people say the person who triggers me is a person who's really important to my success. That's a big challenge. And we're going to talk a lot about that in the next unit. Sometimes I appreciate it's the person, not what they're saying. And I try, like with the buckets, I put the person in one bucket and the feedback in the other. Another thing here is if we can find the gain, I need to hear this, uncomfortable or not, then that can help with relationship triggers. You know, okay, this is uncomfortable, but I'm learning right now. I'm getting good feedback about how my committee meeting went, or I'm getting good feedback about my professionalism at work. I'm getting helpful feedback about team dynamics. I'm not enjoying this. This person is poking my buttons. Let me hold on because I might learn something valuable. That's a bit of a strategy here. Now, if we want to avoid relationship triggers, we need to work to build trust with our colleagues, our mentees, our mentors, our bosses, etc. The more we put a little bit of energy into relationship management, the more likely it will be that relationship triggers happen less often. Trust minimizes the impact of relationship triggers. Now, one part of building trust is acknowledging mistakes and offering authentic apologies, or being willing to receive authentic apologies. Some of us can hear an apology in the moment and say we receive it, but then the honest truth is we hold on to the wrong for a very, very long time. So that person triggers us the next time. That's why so much of this is about self-awareness. Do I tend to hold on to things? Why is that? What can I do about that? Right? Do I tend to say, I'm sorry and I don't mean it, and then I really, really don't resolve the issue? So I think that it comes a lot, again, down to that self-awareness of how we manage relationships. And I think from the perspectives of cultural lenses, from the perspective of different identities in the workplace, all of that adds a layer of complexity to all of this. Which brings me to the third type of trigger, which is an identity trigger. We question the feedback because of our identity, the identity of the giver, or a combination of both. And in some ways, we already addressed a little bit of an identity trigger. So I have this identity that's built some on my role as a teacher and some in my broader life, in my role as the person who cooks and nurtures my family and friends through food. So when I get feedback about that and feel triggered, right, that's a part of my identity. I am triggered more because that identity is a part of my highly valued self. Well, I want to talk about some other identity triggers and teach first from that the concept of attributional ambiguity, which some of you might be aware of, some of you might not be aware of. Attributional ambiguity is uncertainty about whether feedback we receive is based on our identity or our personal ability, right? So said another way, we receive feedback and we say, well, is this a valid response to my performance, or is it driven by a response to my identity or my group membership? This has been shown to occur for race, ethnicity, gender, especially women, physically attractive individuals, overweight individuals, religious affiliations, when those identities aren't hidden, individuals with mental or physical health issues, socioeconomic status, politics, and many other things. Attributional ambiguity can often lead us doubting feedback or struggling to hear feedback. And I think that it is an identity trigger that we need to be really aware of. So I want to do one more slide, and then we're going to come back to the poll here. I want to point out something about attributional ambiguity. It occurs for both positive and negative feedback. Someone tells us we are doing so well, and everything is fine. I just loved your talk. And we say, am I getting this positive feedback because they feel sorry for me, because they don't want to feel a pure prejudice? Like, is this positive feedback accurate, or is it based on my identity? The flip side is we can get some negative feedback. You really need to fix those slides. You need to have proofreading. You need to practice a lot more. And we can say, am I getting this negative feedback because it's warranted, or because this person is biased and acting consciously or unconsciously on those biases? Now, often at the start, this ambiguity can buffer our self-esteem from negative feedback, right? Maybe this isn't about my performance. It's really about them and their biases. The thing is, it can be problematic in the long term because it makes it much, much harder to learn. So it really buffers self-esteem early. And that's really important because I think microaggressions chip away at people's self-esteem. And we do need to do a lot to build up our self-esteem. But if we are always caught in attributional ambiguity around feedback, it can become rather problematic. So what I'd like to do is give everyone a moment to reflect on attributional ambiguity, and Uli is going to launch a poll, and we'll go ahead and get some feedback from the group. And so what I wanted to ask you was whether you have experienced attributional ambiguity. And we'll give people some time on this one. So over half say yes, a fair number saying not sure, and a very small number saying no. I think it's a really interesting thing how many people say not sure. And I was giving a talk last Friday at a meeting, and I realized that we've done the Resilient Scientist series 10 times since we started. So I've talked about feedback a lot of times. We don't always do polls, but we often do polls. I think that this is a really, really important concept as we work to build the most welcoming and inclusive work environments we can. Feedback is such an important part of learning, and identity triggers can really get in the way of learning. And so I think the more we talk about attributional ambiguity and the more we focus on what can be done to build trust and to work through the discomfort of attributional ambiguity. And I think of all of these triggers, this is the most uncomfortable one. There's nothing we can do about our identity. And if we think it's getting in the way of our learning, right, that is a really hard thing to sit with. But the more we have these discussions and the more we learn about this, my hope is the better we will do in giving and receiving feedback. So thank you all, those of you who voted here. I appreciate that. And we will again use this as we work with PIs. And actually, I would invite those of you who would like to share specific experiences with PIs, to send me an email. I do take material that I learned from this to the PI course, because I think it's important for them to indirectly and in large sort of broad group hear from trainees. So the key to overcoming attributional ambiguity is trust. A big part of that is rests with your mentor's responsibility in engaging with you and honoring you and seeing you and building trust. But you play a role in building trust, right? In being available and honestly sharing what you're feeling, in working to develop your ability to give feedback, hear feedback, work with them. But I think it's important to appreciate that a big part of this rests in the people towards the higher top of hierarchies and program directors, etc. That said, it's important for you to acknowledge this and work with this as well. And I will have a lot to say about choosing mentors next week. And I think that a part of resolving some of the issues that we have is having a broader dialogue around choosing mentors. So we'll do that in the next unit. So sometimes, you can sit and pause. Sometimes you feel so certain it was based on bias, the language used, etc., and then you really need to sort of sit with that and decide what next. But I think sometimes, and so many of you said not sure, right? Think about the person telling you whatever they're telling you. Think, what is the status of my relationship with them? Is it generally positive? Do I generally feel supported, seen, heard? Do they acknowledge difference in respectful ways? I sometimes think about that as the status of the bridge, right? In every relationship, there's two people. And do we have this pretty solid relationship? Occasionally the bridge blows in the wind and it gets a little bit rough, but generally, is it solid? Or do I feel ignored, demeaned, etc., right? When we generally appreciate that we have a good relationship with that person, it might be easier to sit with the attributional ambiguity, even go back to them and say, can we talk about this again? Some of it took me by surprise. I want to make sure I understand, right? The first thing is, who is the person? I also like to encourage this question of, is this about me, meaning me in general, or me, my identity, or a bit of both, right? What makes me feel in the moment it's about my identity? What makes me really distrust this feedback in the moment? And then we just want to sit and work through. So what part of the feedback might be driven by identity issues, potential bias? What feedback is just feedback I prefer not to hear? What part of the feedback is just plain wrong, right? So essentially, in some way, going back to those truth, the concept of truth triggers, what is the truth in the feedback? Sometimes we decide there is truth, but the way it was delivered was inappropriate anyway. And that's a real issue with feedback. It can often be delivered in ways that make it very, very hard to hear. But sometimes we shut down to feedback we don't want to shut down to. And I hope that having a set of questions and paying attention to this idea of trust and how is our relationship will help. Boundaries are a big part of this. Emotions come into play during feedback all the time. Discomfort, embarrassment, frustration, irritation, and anger. And we've talked about all of these uncomfortable emotions before. Remember, uncomfortable or not, they are important data points. We just want to be able to pause and accurately interpret those emotions and decide whether to take action, how to take action, what to say, etc. I also think feedback can elicit another set of emotions we haven't talked about: surprise, disbelief, shock. Sometimes we believe things are going well and suddenly somebody tells us they are not. It is very hard in the middle of a surprise or shock. disbelief reaction, to really hear things. So first and foremost is appreciating that these emotions are important. We want to learn how to recognize them and be with them. The second is grounding strategies that can help in the moment. That could be a deep breath. That could be sitting up and holding on to the edges of your chair. That could be a quick mantra. That could be a quick visual. Are there grounding strategies that you can use in the moment? Some grounding strategies you can't use because you're in the middle of talking to someone. So I pointed out this other situation where I said, oh, I went to take a walk. Well, that's a really big grounding strategy for me, but I can't say, hey, give me a minute, let me take a walk. That said, time is often our friend. And if I can't ground myself in the moment, or I notice the other person isn't grounded in the moment, time can really help. That could be suggesting we talk later. That could be being quiet for a moment, right? That could be saying, can I just have a moment to process? It doesn't have to be, can we talk tomorrow? One other thing to remember around emotions and feedback, the other party is also likely feeling a wave of emotions, and they too might struggle to control them. Now, again, managers and mentors and teachers have a responsibility to be working on this and to be able to do this. But like you, they are human. They have good days and bad days. They have triggers. They have stress responses. They do better some days than others. Again, if there's trust, you can likely appreciate that. If there's no trust, that's when we really have to discuss other possibilities. I want to give you a model that I really like that is developed in that book that we've been talking about. And it sort of points out this idea that feedback actually happens in 3 time dimensions. It's actually like time travel. In the moment, right, is when you're talking to someone, but really you're talking about the past, even if it was the immediate past. Sometimes it can be the somewhat distant past. But the goal of feedback is behavior change and learning. So you move from the past and the present towards the future of what should happen differently moving forward. Now, in the present, we have to be aware of our triggers, our emotions, the physical sensations that come along with that, the distorted stories we're telling ourselves. We have a lot to hold on to in the present. In the past, when we think about the past, it's what happened to bring us to now. What happened to bring us to this feedback that I'm receiving? Think about it. There's data and how people interpreted the data. Those of you who came to the second talk, you remember we talked about thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. People see behaviors and then they interpret them and tell themselves their own story. So they see behaviors or data and they interpret the data. In the future, there's also 2 components, behavior change and follow-up. I like this model because it allows us to focus on each part of those 3 dimensions and think about goals. So your goal around the present moment is to really be calm. It's taking slow, deep breaths, relaxing the tension in your body. Some part of dealing with the present is inoculating yourself by remembering communication styles. If you are, you know that you're on the receiving end of a driver, expect driving, right? And you go in saying, this will be intense. You want to calm your distortions and your triggers by gently acknowledging them and parking them. Parking them is the other language that's often used, the visual of putting it in a bucket, putting it in the corner, right? I am aware of this, but I can't get caught in it right now. Oh, I'm catastrophizing. I'll deal with that later. If you are angry, you might want to hold off responding. If you're very upset, you might not be able to learn from the feedback. So again, you might want to hold off on responding. Asking for time if you need it is a good strategy. And I wish every PI and every person in a tense feedback relationship would say, if you need some time, I can give you some time. I think a lot of time managers are afraid to do that because they think the conversation will never happen. But I think it's a good strategy. Over time, you might build up more resilience in the moment. Your feedback resilience expands and you don't need quite as much time, but asking for time is okay. I also like to encourage you to find your curious self. So our first response is defensiveness. Maybe we could come up with this way of first comes defensiveness, then I calm myself, then comes curiosity. Why do they think this way? Why are they telling me this? What might I have done? What might they not know that they need to know? So I think these are ways to control the present moment. One other thing, especially across hierarchical relationships or with individuals who put a lot of emphasis on relationship, is to offer a thank you. You know, you can actually say thank you and say, this is really hard for me to hear right now. I appreciate your willingness to have this conversation, but it's really difficult. Or I appreciate and it's really difficult, right? Because sometimes just showing you appreciate it can bring the energy down. It also brings you back to the reminder that this is for learning. So these are some strategies for dealing with the present moment. Some strategies for looking towards the past and future. And there's a mistake here, so I'll go ahead and fix it. So, strategies for the past and future. So understanding the past really matters because the learning happens here, right? If you can hold on to your calm and your feedback resilience long enough to talk about really what happened, then you can learn, right? Then you really know what the issues are. You want to learn how to ask clarifying questions, right? Can you help me understand? Can you explain what you mean by that? Remember, one of the things that makes feedback hard is it can be very vague. You're not professional enough when we go to clinic. Well, maybe your definition of professional enough and their definition of professional enough are different, right? So you might want to say, can you be clear what you mean by professional, right? A clarifying question. You want to use the active listening and assertiveness skills we talked about last time. If I understand correctly, you are frustrated that I don't always text when I'm going to be late, right? People like to be heard. So remember those empathic listening skills we talked about last time. You also, to understand the past, at times you need to provide context or an explanation. They have an interpretation and it's off base. So you might, could I offer a bit of context about what's happening for me? Go back to those risk reward scaffolds where we say we have to decide the risk of not telling people something, right? There's a risk, there's a potential reward as well, right? Potential risk, potential reward. So sometimes we haven't told someone something, but now we need to tell them. Again, we want to remember boundaries. We don't want to tell too much maybe, but we might need to provide context. And then finally, sometimes an apology is really warranted at this point. It is important to be willing to offer that. If we just say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, thinking we're just trying to placate our boss, it's not always effective because there's no learning. But I do think that it can really help us understand the past and have a better conversation. Now, looking to the future, you can ask for suggestions, right? Can you help me with some suggestions of how to change that? If the feedback is something around you really need to improve your writing skills. Do you have any thoughts of courses I can take? Is there someone here on campus I could talk with about that? Is there someone in the group that can help me? So you can ask for suggestions. You could also offer suggestions. I will reach out to the OITE to get some guidance on time management. I will check if there is a course on coding so that I can bring my skills up to par. So you can offer suggestions. You can also ask for suggestions. One last thing to get the most out of a feedback session is to request a follow-up meeting to assure appropriate action and to know when. Can I follow up in a week? That might be fine for some things, but you might need 3 weeks for some other things. You might need even longer. Sometimes it doesn't need to be a meeting. It can just be email. So strategies for holding on in the present so you can learn about the past so that you can make change moving forward. That is feedback resilience. To do that, we need to know our feedback and stress response. We need to understand the physical signals that are sending us messages in the moment. We also need to pay attention to the other person. Sometimes we're holding on and they're really struggling, and it would be wise for us to say, let's take a moment. Ask for time if you need it. If you are given time, prepare. So if someone says, I want to have a conversation with you about what happened last week, and you think, oh, there's going to be some difficulty here, right? I could be triggered. Prepare, think it through. Remember not to get snagged by gross overstatements, generalizations, draconian pronouncements. So rebutting always and never doesn't work very often, right? I imagine them saying often or rarely. Sometimes people make really draconian statements, right? We'll never get this work published. That's coming from their distortions, their anger, their frustration. Sometimes those draconian statements really trigger us, right? And so we want to remember to put them into context. I think we need to practice asking calm, clarifying questions under lower stress situations with friends and colleagues, and not so much our bosses. So I think that is a skill. Some are really easy. I notice people in my office will say, how so? I think that it buys time. I think it's actually a really, really helpful strategy. We need some quick go-tos. Eventually, we might get much more sophisticated. You know, we have our feelings, we have the distortions, and we have the actual feedback. And in the moment, it's hard to distinguish those. So sometimes we really need to process the feedback later. One thing really important to accept is that we can't control how others see us. We cannot control how others deliver feedback. Yes, we can do our best to have them see us in an accurate way, but we don't control their distortions, their biases, how busy they are, so they might not be looking very carefully. And many people have not had enough training with giving feedback. They get stressed. Attributional ambiguity gets in the way. If I tell them this, will they think that I am sexist, racist, prejudiced in some way? So the honest truth is there's a lot of stress about delivering feedback as well. Your goal in the long term is to disregard what is not helpful and focus on what is. And that means going back to our discussion about boundaries. Not everything someone tells us needs to be acted on, right? Sometimes we decide that I want to talk to some other people I trust to see what their view of this is. It is not always important that we hear and process everything that's said. Sometimes we have to say that is not helpful. That person is not knowledgeable. I need to put that aside. So much of this is finding our growth mindset, right? And we find our growth mindset when we reach out for support. The problem is that when we receive harsh feedback, we're embarrassed, and embarrassment tells us to hide, right? So the rule of opposite actions. We're getting a message to hide. It is time to get support. Our first response to feedback is often to shut down, to disbelieve, to become defensive, to feel under attack. I would say we should just appreciate that that's our amygdala being the amygdala, right? We have a built-in stress detector and built-in stress response systems, and they jump into play first. What we want to do is bring into play our calmer, slower nervous system, our frontal lobe, our higher cognitive processes. So it is a challenge that means learning how to ground ourselves in the moment. It is a challenge if we catastrophize. It is a challenge if we are triggered, right? It can be distortions that make it hard. It can be difficult emotion, uncomfortable emotions that make it hard. It can be triggers. Receiving feedback and staying with it is much harder and much more complicated when it comes from someone we care about or is about something we care about. So just remember that. So this is hard because it is really hard, and it takes a lot of work. It also takes a really great well-being practice going all the way back to unit number 1. It makes sense that we struggle more with developmental or negative feedback, but let's be honest, at times we struggle to hear positive feedback. It can be attributional ambiguity. Is this really right? It can be cultural messages about feedback. Sometimes we hear positive feedback and it elicits all kinds of emotions that are uncomfortable in the moment. So appreciate this is not only about developmental feedback. After a really difficult feedback interaction, you want to make sure that you get support. You want to make sure that you talk it through with people. You want to be certain that you're not dealing with this alone. Silent suffering is really not a great way to learn. Sometimes we just need to put it away and revisit the feedback when we feel more calm and more focused. And sometimes we need to focus first on the feedback interaction itself and not on the feedback. So we want to first say, how did I handle this? This communication style is hard for me. How did I handle this? That's called taking a positive inquiry approach. What went well? What am I proud of? Then we can say, okay, having done that, where's the learning for me now? Sometimes when there is trust, the intent to help you improve can really be separated from the impact. It didn't feel good. Okay, but there needs to be trust. That's why I said to a point. So I think it is incredibly important to come back to that idea of trust and to think about relationships with our mentors and building trust over time, which, remember, takes both parties. When you feel feedback is wrong, I offer you 2 things. One is to think, is there a perception that led to that feedback that I can control? And the second is, if I decided it's just plain wrong, what do I do about it? And that means getting some advice about next best steps. That might mean going to have a conversation with someone to clarify things. So I think there are a lot of things to remember about the issue of how do I take care of myself after a difficult feedback interaction. It is not just deciding to ignore it. So a giraffe approach here, an ostrich approach here does not work. Oh, I'll just ignore it. They had a bad day, no big deal. That isn't what I mean here, right? On the other hand, we can't take a totally jackal approach. I'm terrible. This is the end. I'm finished here. What a disaster. What we're really looking for is the giraffe. Where's the learning? Where's the truth? Where did I do well? Where do I need to do better? And how can I make that happen? Now, some of you are sitting here and saying, I wish I got feedback, right? I work for someone who never gives feedback. And a lot of you in that tell me the style of your PI used absent, right? And that's a problem because we can't grow and learn very well in the absence of feedback. So you might need to ask for feedback to get feedback. You want to be clear and precise in your ask. I give you some strategies. Can you tell me what I'm doing well, where I need to improve? Is there anything you want me to do that I'm not currently doing? You can't just say, I would really benefit from some feedback. You'll get something like, oh, everything's fine. It is best to request a meeting by email to give people time to prepare, to know what you're coming to talk about with them. And I just gave you a little bit of a script. I've been in your group now for 3 months, whatever, fill in the blank. It would be helpful for me to get your input about fill in the blank. This will help me have a successful rotation, successful internship, contribute to the science here. Thanks. I can meet whenever is convenient for you. That sort of conveys, I prefer a meeting. I don't really just want you to send me back an email. Again, you don't control others, right? And if you don't get a response, you need to feel pleased that you tried. And it's a data point on the mentoring relationship, right? And that's an important thing, especially for those of you who are in the process of deciding whether to stay in a group or not. Some thoughts on giving feedback to others. We'll just wrap up quickly with that. You know, it depends on the person and the issue. How much does the issue matter to you? How much does the person and relationship matter to you? Is there a pattern that needs to be dealt with? We talked about this a lot in assertiveness in the last unit. All of the material discussed today is useful when you give feedback. You will be triggered. It will be stressful. You will need to ground yourself. You need to remember that there is behavior and interpretation. You don't want to get into interpreting. You want to describe the behavior. So everything we talked about can just be flipped and you can use it to give feedback. People need to hear appreciation feedback, to be open to developmental and corrective feedback, and timing really matters. So you can strike when the iron is hot, meaning something happened and I need to say something right now. But sometimes the goal is to let it go. We're angry, we're defensive, we're frustrated. It's not a good time. Then we want to strike while the iron is cold, meaning not too far away that everyone forgets it, but after you've calmed down, say, hey, can I give you some feedback on what happened yesterday? Or can we talk about how it made me feel? Right? Remember, I statements, remember positive inquiry, and I want to use, I want to learn from what happened. And when I asked for feedback, you just said everything was fine. I really need more. Can we talk about it? So timing matters, and you want to be careful. Remember, there's behavior plus interpretation. You want to describe behavior. A lot of you reach this point and say, I'd like to give some feedback to my PI. Should I or shouldn't I? And I hate to say this, but I say it all the time. It really depends on the context. It depends on your PI or your boss, how open they are, how committed to mentoring you they are. If you have a supportive PI, I think it's a really good idea to consider giving some feedback. Think about your own internal barriers, prepare, really think about communication styles, get ready to have a conversation. If you feel that your PI is often unsupportive, then I think you need to seek support and guidance as you decide a way forward. And I'm going to talk a lot about mentoring and mentoring up next week. When it comes to deciding about things like this, program and university leadership or NIH leadership are a really good source of support and guidance. They can help you access institutional resources. They can support you through the process. They can be available to hear how it went later. So remember the resources that you have. The thing is that if you don't give feedback and you stay in an environment that doesn't work for you for too long, right? Ignoring problems don't make them go away, and you're here to learn. So I just want to end with 3 images that help me. All right. When the first is rain gear, when you are on the receiving end of a very emotive or very directive communicator, and you know it's going to be a difficult conversation, imagine yourself in your very best rain gear. You got a big umbrella, you got some amazing boots, you got a great coat, right? You're going to have to withstand some energy, but you want to have the conversation, you want to learn from the feedback. Back to the giraffe, right? The idea is not to ignore all feedback. The idea is not to get so caught in it that we are hard on ourselves. The idea is the giraffe approach. This was difficult. I am hurting right now. I need support. I need strategies. I'm going to learn from this. And then finally, the bridge. If you want to learn from individuals, you have to build a relationship with them. They have to be willing to build a relationship with you. Sometimes the bridge is beautiful, like this bridge. Sometimes the bridge is shaky, and you have to put some energy into shoring it up and strengthening it. But remember the relationship. Again, in my opinion, the small groups are the most valuable part of what we offer. I learn from your feedback. I read it all the time. Uli's going to put the link to give me some feedback into the chat right now. I gave you another journaling prompt to end, and I'm going to take some questions. Thank you for all of you coming to talk. How can we tell feedback from criticism? Very, very often feedback feels like criticism. In some ways, we could use the language of constructive criticism instead of feedback, right? You know, the honest truth is critique by itself is actually, I think, a value neutral word, right? I'm critiquing something. I'm giving you input. I'm sharing the strengths of what you did, and I'm sharing the things that need to improve. So I would use that, think about critique in that way. Is it odd to have two or more of these communication styles as opposed to one all the time? No, most of us tend to have more than one communication style. Some of that has to do with the fact that these boxes aren't quite as rigid as they look in a graph. They bleed into each other. Some of it has to do with our stress level at the time. There's this idea that we are naturally one way, but then we're in an environment that feels unnatural to us. So we sort of switch and are another way. You'll hear that talked about sort of culturally as code switching. You know, some of us, because of hierarchy, will be one way or the other. It is absolutely normal to use all of these styles. And the honest truth is, as I do this more and more, and as I work on my own emotional health and emotional regulation more and more through the tools we talk about here, I've come to find that I can access all four of those. Reflective is the hardest, but there are times when I sit quiet for a good long time and listen now, and I am really glad I did that. So it takes a lot of time, but there is nothing abnormal about using all of these. Does the other person's communication style affect ours? I feel I communicate differently with different people. That is absolutely true. So we mirror other people. There's a big discussion in neuroscience about mirror neurons, where we see one thing, and so then we do the same, you know, even to sometimes physical things, right? Someone folds their leg and leans back and put their hands up, and before we know it, we folded our leg, done the same. A little bit of managing someone's style is trying to match theirs a little bit. So if someone's reflective, we want to tone down our style. So you are accurate in making that comment. There are such things as good and bad communicators, though. How does that intersect with different styles? I would agree. There are better and worse communicators. I think that better communicators are aware of their styles. They're aware of the strengths of their styles. They're aware of the liabilities of their styles. They can tone their styles down as needed. I would say that tends to lead to better communication. Worse communicators are people that are stuck in a style, don't feel they ever need to change, where emotion drives the worst caricature of that style. And I think that you are absolutely right. So there's no better or worse style, but there are people who use these styles in really elegant, helpful ways. And there are people who use these styles in inelegant and unhelpful and unkind ways. How do you understand the prevalent communication style of someone? We watch a little bit. Sometimes we actually have a lab meeting or a group meeting where we talk about things like this, or we all go together and we come back and share, or we invite someone from a resource office on our campus here. We invite someone from OITE and they come and help about it. But generally, it's by watching. It's really nice in groups where we are more open and talking about this. And so I would say both of those. What about condescending feedback? I think that it depends. I think that some parts of what feels condescending is a part of someone's style. It can be a part of their view of hierarchy. It can be such a trigger that we can't hear things. It might be that we decide this person tends to be condescending a bit, but I'm going to work through it because there's some benefits to this. Not ask feedback. Sometimes people offer us feedback and we didn't ask for it and we don't want to hear it. Sometimes they offer feedback we didn't ask for and it's incredibly valuable. So context really matters in all of that. People goes on the question to say equals or colleagues sometimes think they know better. They give their opinion. They use words like you should, you can't, etc. I actually think that when that's a part of boundaries, right? Sometimes we get feedback that is not solicited, not warranted, not appropriate. And we have to have boundaries. And we can say, thanks for the feedback and walk on, right? Or we can decide this is something they do a lot. And we can say, I'd really like to talk with you about how I respond when I receive unsolicited feedback, going back to that assertiveness and those I statements. What about when people feel they can give you feedback about you based on their emotions? Your way of talking is making people nervous. You should change it. I think that we do get a lot of unhelpful feedback. When I can't quite interpret something, I have started to borrow a little bit that how so. I tend to say, could you elaborate more? I mean, I don't even know how to interpret your way of talking is making people nervous. So that's the clarifying questions, right? How so? Can you give me an example? Can you help me understand this better? I think that a lot of feedback is delivered poorly, and it's really hard to get at the learning. Sometimes we decide it's really worth getting at the learning. Sometimes we set boundaries. I feel like I need a lot of time to process after getting feedback, not always because I'm emotional, but usually because I need times to contextualize it or strategize about it. How do I help others help me to do this? I think that that is a beautiful amount of self-awareness, and it would be really helpful, not in the middle of a feedback session, maybe strike when the iron is cold, to talk to some important people and say, I really need time to process. Somebody did that with me recently, and it was really helpful. I don't know that I would have actually appreciated that they needed that time, while I try to get a sense of people's styles, I don't always get it right. And someone said, I really need some extra time. And it was great. We talked, we took a little bit of a break. We talked again. We jumped right back onto Zoom, right? We just went away for a little bit. And I really appreciated that. So that was in the moment, but there was a lot of trust, and we have been working together a long time. I think it could be hard to do in the moment if you don't have that type of trust. So you might want to go to someone and say, I want to talk about how I'm doing here. You might start from some of the, sort of the relationship building, sort of the bridge. I'm learning a lot. I appreciate this and that. I want to give you a little bit of insight into my communication style and the way I receive feedback, and I really need some time. And so I would encourage you to consider doing that if it feels safe. I find I interact best with people diagonal from me in the communication grid. I'm expressive. I feel I do best with analyticals, as if we balanced each other out. So that's interesting. I also have reflected on that quite a bit. Sometimes I think expressives love analyticals because we talk all the time and they don't stop us or jump in. So we get all of the airwave. What you need to ask yourself is it working for me to get what I need from those interactions? So I have come to appreciate that I need to tone it down a little bit and wait more, or else I don't get what I need from the analyticals. In the book and in some other materials that use similar things, they talk a lot about getting the most from other people based on your style. And we'll talk a bit about that in the groups next week. I was asked for feedback from a trainee. The trainee's manager then responded with defensiveness, criticized the feedback in a defensive manner. I am appalled how powerful staff can abuse their power in a destructive manner. I would agree that there are really disappointing interactions in the workplace, and how to sort things out. I mean, let's be honest, everything I talked about is complex just in a dyad. When you start to have a triad, and that's something that can make committee meetings very complex for graduate students, and why we have these deeper skills groups now, right? Because this is like the basic principles and it's damn hard. So putting it together even harder really makes it even more challenging. I think that a lot of people are stressed, and a lot of people don't have enough management training and enough emotional intelligence training. And a part of changing the culture of science is making sure everybody realizes the importance of this type of training. I know I'm smart and produce excellent work. My mentor did not provide feedback about my work, but rather how he was annoyed with me for not wanting to turn on the camera during meetings. How do I tell my mentor his feedback is not helpful? I will say this, there's a lot of discussion about cameras on and off during meetings, and there is a general feel, especially now that you can blur the background or use a fake background. There's a lot of discussion about the benefit of people seeing each other. That said, it sounds like it's deeper there, that you would like some appreciation feedback. You would like to have a discussion about cameras where you get a chance to explore your perspective. And I think this is a time for you to think about how important it is to you and whether you want to have a conversation and what you hope to get out of the conversation. So again, I always come down to context and thinking it through and deciding how important it is. So that brings us to 1 minute to 5, and we're going to end on time. I apologize. The link to the feedback is not here, but I know that Uli put it into the chat. So again, I thank you all for being here. I wish you the best, and I cannot stress enough how important the groups are. I will see you in 2 weeks. We will be doing a hybrid in person and over Zoom talk, with the hope that COVID cases here in Bethesda remain low and we can do that. So thank you all, and I will see you soon.